Yeah, should we start with the intro?
Like we usually do.
No, sometimes we have like we'll get into that actually. Let's get into that.
Oh, right. Yeah.
All right. Hey, all right, Sophie. I've had enough of your jib. Welcome to the Nordic Mythology Podcast. I'm Daniel Farron, co-owner of the company Horns of Odin, and I'm joined as always by Dr. Mathias Nordvig.
Hello, everyone. This time it's just me and Dan, and we're going to be talking about
stuff.
Yes, we got stuff to talk about.
You've got a grumpy Dan because the episode's an hour late because I tried to update my laptop and it decided it wanted to update to Windows 11 and I had to stop it halfway through. And then it had to put itself back to how it was before. And it's been a whole thing. So
it has been a thing. And I've been ranting about flags while you were rebooting. So
I know I'm sad that I missed that. But I've got coffee and beer, so I'm happy now.
Good.
Yes, I'm good. One thing I wanted to mention, I noticed that for a few episodes we've done a kind of a flowing intro, if one for a better word. We've kind of had a chat and then done the intro. And I saw someone comment saying that I forget to introduce you sometimes. And I was like, no, I don't forget to introduce you. It's just sometimes we have interesting conversation before the podcast and we don't, it's nice to not have to cut it out. So we was trying out a different method of leaving that in and then just kind of throwing the intro in
a new format. Yeah. I mean, I kind of like it. I think it's kind of cool, and I don't feel overlooked either.
No, a lot of the time we have a good chat before, especially when we have guests on. We have like a little back and forth, and we'll talk about the episode and what we're going to do. But sometimes stuff gets mentioned in there that I'm like, no, save this for the episode. So if we kind of leave that in and just we've started recording a lot earlier, so we can just kind of hopefully flow in, and then sometimes the intro might come a little later because it's when I can squeeze it in. But I'm not forgetting Mathias, I promise. I can't forget that face. There's only two of us here. So I wanted to clear that up because I did see someone mention it was, we just want to try and get as much content in there as possible and not have to cut out anything that might be of interest.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, what was it that you wanted to talk about today? Is it something about horned helmets?
I'm glad you listened. I'm glad you listened. Well, I hope you know about. So horned helmets. I keep seeing an article or different articles pop up this week in my weekly Facebook venturing. Time and time again, articles on the bronze helmets that a lot of people attribute Vikings wearing horned helmets to. I think you'll probably be able to pronounce the name much better than me, but I'm sure you know the two that were found, and were they dated to around 500 BC?
At least.
But right? Apparently, the article I saw says it's now been accurately carbon dated to maybe like 3000 BC. And
that sounds more likely because the helmets are from the Bronze Age, right? The 500 BC, that's when we have the beginning of the what in the northern part of Europe is called the Celtic Iron Age. Like it begins around that time. Of course, archaeologists will be much better at being specific and precise about those time periods. But yeah, so the Vikings helmets are this pair of like Bronze Age presumed ceremonial horned helmets found in Vikings in Zealand and Denmark. Let's see, like the latest dating, as far as I can see, is based off of some birch tar that was found on the horns, and the sample,
which is insane. So
yeah.
that literally just some tar that's been on there for a while, and they've managed to be able to extract that and
Yeah, I mean,
date
there's tar that has gotten on there before they were put in the bog where they were found in 1942. And yeah, so they're dated to the period between 857 and 907 BC. So like getting almost close to 1,000 years before the year zero.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so the idea of the horned helmets when it comes to Vikings is sort of like a weird byproduct of Wagner, really, who was spicing up the costumes that his actors were wearing in the original Ring of the Nibelungen, right? When he put it on in what, like 1882 or something like that. And then that's sort of like, he was just, riffing off of like the, few historical things that he knew from Central Europe and so on. And so like feathers and shit like that in the helmets. And yeah, then that sort of like became a thing, with
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's I guess, see, I'm always torn on horned helmets, and I don't mind admitting this, not because I'm biased to anything horn derived, but no, I don't think that they would have worn horned helmets to battle. I think that's ridiculous. That doesn't make sense, and just wouldn't work. But I do think, and you may tell me that I'm completely wrong, that it's the possibility that they could have used them in ceremonial instances for like ceremonial headdress. I think that could be feasible.
Well, so the thing is, I would caution against that, like that idea of the practicality of things, because that's not normally how people think, not even with war. Maybe in modern times, but definitely not back then. And there's this funny meme with a samurai dude with like a weird facial expression, where that says when they say it's not feasible to go to war with horns on your helmet, but you didn't get the memo, because the dude has horn on his helmet. There are plenty of like samurai helmets that have had horns. Further, like, you can disagree as much as you want. There's plenty of historical examples of war helmets with horns on them, which means, if you look at it in terms of like a practical situation, right? Having those horns would definitely be awkward. Like, just consider how easy it is for somebody's sword to take you down, like, and you're going down sideways, because it gets caught on that horn.
You could be taking down their sword with your horned helmet. You got to look at things a different way sometimes.
Absolutely, right. But it's like, okay, so what do we have? Well, historical examples, we have, samurai with horned helmets, other war headdresses of various kinds with elaborate gear that in different ways get caught in whatever the fuck, right? And a fuck ton of medieval European horned helmets on knights, with all kinds of funky gear on them. And you have a couple of examples from Celtic Gaul in France as well, from the Bronze Age and such. So there are plenty of historical examples of horned helmets that warriors have worn, also in war, right? And
what about the Sutton Hoo helmet? Would that, because obviously that's something I wouldn't imagine somebody would actually wear to war, unless maybe you were one of those people that was at war where you were on the horseback at the back of the war, where you weren't actually going to get hit with anything, because
I don't
that
know.
seems way too elaborate to actually want to wear into battle.
I don't know, man. Like, there's, again, go to the 1200s and 1300s and 1400s in Europe, and you'll see some pretty elaborate headgear. And I like, look, back then people wore all metal metal armor, right, all over the fucking place, plate metal armor, and some of them had that plate metal armor fashioned in the crotch as an erect penis, right? So you went to war with an erect wang.
I mean, that's just symbolic.
Headgear.
That's symbolic for that I'm a badass and I'm going to war. And
exactly. Rage
this is how much
pointing out.
This is how much I like war right now.
Exactly. Like, so you go to war with a giant boner. You put all kinds of funky stuff, horns and feathers on your helmet as well. Like, there's an element to this that has to do with intimidation as well, right? When you go to war with your rage boner,
I was about to say that if I started running into war with an erect penis, then I think it might scare a few people as well.
Yeah, and the same thing is, like, if you have a helmet with an elaborate face on it with like this weird grin on, which is an actual historical thing for some of these helmets as well, right? People are just gonna get like weirded out and freaked out, right? So it's intimidation tactics, and horns can be a part of that as well. So it is not unlikely, right, that people have gone to war with horned helmets, especially also considering all the fucking evidence that we have from it. So question though, did these Vikings do it? Did Scandinavians have helmets with horns on them? We have no actual physical examples of helmets with horns on them. We have
said that we don't have many helmets in general.
That's one thing, right? That's one particular issue here. I think the Järmundbu helmet is the only like full helmet that has been found. It's from Norway, right? From
Do you
the
know how
900s.
many times I've looked at the name of that helmet and had no fucking idea how to pronounce it? Because that's a word that I can't even try and mumble through.
But then we have depictions of horns on helmets from the Viking Age and from before the Viking Age. Fredrik is pointing out the Valsjäre before the Viking Age. Yeah, it's still kind of the Viking Age. Like, it's the Vendel period, which is basically what creates the Viking Age. So we could say that it's the same culture that we're dealing with here, same cultural sphere. What have we there? We have it, the Valsjäre and Vendel helmets from Sweden. We have these depictions of horned helmets on helmets that don't have horns, by the way. Like, the actual helmets don't have horns, but there are depictions of horned helmets on the helmets without the horns. So and there what we see is like a dancing warrior.
Rewind that back. What?
Yeah. So
do you mean as in like they meant to be horns, but they're not actually made of horns, like the ones we mentioned earlier? No, they're all bronze.
Well, that's also an element, but so we have a couple of helmets, right? And they have little plates on them with depictions of helmets with horns, but the helmets themselves that have those depictions on them don't have horns. At least it doesn't look like that they had horns. Which is curious.
Is that?
Yeah, that is kind of bizarre, isn't it? And so what we have is like this little dancing warrior who's getting it looks like he's getting stabbed in the foot by a berserker. Like, so a man who's wearing literally a wolf or bear skin over his head so that he looks like a wolf or a bear. He's like poking him in the foot. This dancing warrior, and the dancing warrior has two horns that turn into raven heads on top.
Mm-hmm.
And and we have several pins found from the Vendel period into the Viking Age, to the end of the Viking Age, so like close to the 1000, from all over Scandinavia, primarily Denmark and Sweden, but all over. Mostly in context of temple sites, by the way, where there's a little pin with a male head on it, and this male head has horns that turn into raven heads, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in some cases, the one eye has been scratched out on these little pinheads, by the way.
I mean,
So that's very Odin, right? That's what we're dealing with.
I have to shout out that if you would like a Odin mask with two raven horns on his helmet, you can pop over to notamythologypodcast.com and pick one up from there, because we sell them.
There you go. And also, by the way, if you want to be down with the cool crowd and support our Patreon and get the bonus episodes, just sign up today. And
oh, we suck so bad. What have we become?
Horse, that's what we are. Nordic mythology horse.
we just, to be honest, we love what we do, and we just want to keep growing it and dedicate as much time to this as possible. And obviously Patreon is a good way to help us out.
It really is.
And we know everybody can't, but even just sharing the podcast helps a lot. But where were you?
Yeah, so we have those little pins with those heads, with those horns too. So like there's obviously something going on from this, pre-Viking Age Vendel period, the 500-600s into the Viking Age, that has to do with warriors wearing helmets with horns that are fashioned as not like these ridiculous cow horns, but are fashioned as like raven heads. Like, so it's like bird horns ish coming out of the head. It is not really clear what that really represents, but obviously it has something to do with Odin. It has something to do with this idea of Odin having two ravens. It has something to do with probably with like some mental capacities or something like that, if we are to go by what the mythology tells us about this, like Hugin and Munin. They're two ravens, and one means the thought and the other one means the memory, or something like that. And that's what we have, right? That's these depictions we have. So what it looks like is also that these helmets are worn in a particularly ritualistic context. Were they worn at war? If they ever existed, that's a good question. We can't really tell because we don't have the physical evidence to support the idea. But is it likely? Is it possible? Is it something we can perhaps assume based off of the imagery that we have available to us? Yeah, probably. Like it is. So is the original idea of Vikings with these fucking cow horns in their helmets ridiculous and far out? Yes. But does that preclude the idea that they actually did wear some ceremonial war helmets? Some of them. No. And this is where we may have to like open up the discussion about like what did actually happen at war. And that's another aspect of all of this. War fought in that time period was not just to win, right? War was deeply imbued with ritual and magic and religion, right? And this is where this idea of the pragmatic and practical aspects sort of like dissipates, because there's going to be a lot of those people in that army that is invading having just gone through like weird esoteric initiation rituals to become Odin's Einherja or some shit like that, right? They don't care if they're dying or not. Because if that idea of like going to Valhalla and existing in an afterlife with Odin and all of that stuff, if it was that powerful and did exist in at least in sort of like a shadowy way of what we know it from the written material, right? They might just be like woohoo till Valhalla, even though they probably wouldn't say that. But you see what I mean? And so, you know, whether or not your headdress is going to be an impractical thing to wear might not actually be that important to them. So, so
do you
that's
think, do you think they ever were kind of, because the whole till Valhalla type thing, I know obviously you've been silly saying that, but that idea, it's almost suicidal or kind of kamikaze-esque, that you're not bothered if you survive. But they were, it feels like they were too successful in war, in battle, to have that kind of opinion of I don't care if we die. It feels like they had some military, at least, strategy, and it wasn't all just about finding death to go to the next world. There was a will to win, so you could get what you want to get, your land, get the silver.
But I mean, again, we have Frederick pointing out some truths here. They weren't really that successful. Like that, you can't really say that if you look at Viking battles in England, right, in the period from 793 to 1066, you can't really say that these Scandinavians are more successful than the already existing English population. Because in some cases they win, in some cases they lose. In some cases they have success installing some kind of ruler for a bit, and then, you know, that falls apart and la 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 la. So the assumption that the Vikings were particularly successful, good warriors, we might have to dial that back a little bit. It doesn't actually look like they were that good. So, and again, you know, the kamikaze, as you mentioned them, right? They were kind of successful for a while, like warriors willing to go on a suicidal mission.
Yeah, but they had an airplane.
It did.
I feel like you can make a lot more damage with a plane than just one man running across the field.
Certainly, but the point is that these things aren't that clear cut all the time. And what it also kind of shows with this medieval warfare that's happening around Vikings and all that stuff, is that when you do apply pragmatics and practicalities and such things, that's when you kick the Vikings' ass. Like that's what the English had success with, right? What happens after the first experiences of Viking assholes fucking around, throwing axes at everybody? Well, let's build some walls around our cities and up our protection and fortification in general. Oh, let's also make sure to conscript. Let's also make sure that the conscripted soldiers that we now have proper gear, you know, and that kind of stuff. And then boom, then you start kicking Viking ass, right? So in that sense, you could actually say that when you apply pragmatics and you apply the idea of like this needs to be practical for warfare, that's when you have more success. And that's also kind of what we're seeing in European history in general, right? When you have some war custom that has been played out over and over and over, somebody comes up with a pragmatic solution to counter that. And that, again, let me draw out that let me bring forth that the great example of the Danish army being completely obliterated by a bunch of peasants in what is now northern Germany, right? We have knights in metal and armor and on heavy ass horses and all that stuff, and these Frisian peasants, I think it's in the 1400s, if I remember correctly, in Dietmarschen. They just managed to lure them into an area that they can flood. and then boom, they win the war, right?
Mhm.
That's a pragmatic solution to and otherwise, a pretty forceful, powerful war machine in the medieval period, right?
Mhm. And I guess you probably turned up to battle in whatever you had available. And it's not like modern militaries that have a uniform, armor. Like everybody looks the same when they go to battle. Whereas I guess back then that wasn't the case. You came in what was available.
I mean, all of that stuff depends on who's organizing the army and how much money do they have, right? Danish peasant armies are an example, right? What they would do is that they would take the pitchforks and the scythes, and then they would refashion them to weapons, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's pretty common throughout medieval Europe. That's when you see like a peasant uprising. That's usually what they're doing, right? Sometimes they just use whatever farm tools they have. And then then you will also have the professionals, right? Those few in a medieval army that are professionals. Sometimes you have a king or a duke or a local aristocrat who's got military ambitions and spends a lot of money on fitting out an army, and then of course you'll see better gear, right? But in this time period is and up until, well, it's still kind of this situation, like the name of the game is technological advances, right? So you like when you introduce gunpowder into warfare in Europe in the late medieval period, early modern period, whatever we want to call that, right? Then those armies that don't have gunpowder, they get fucked, right? And then when you introduce the upgraded loading weapons, like I can never fucking remember what that mechanism is called, but it's pretty much how a modern rifle works, as opposed to like front loading it with like shoving powder and bullet and all that stuff into the. Paul, thank you once again. You saved me. I think you did that before you introduced the breach, right? That's when you then have a new situation, right? New warfare situation where those who have the new modernized weapons, they are capable of killing a lot more enemies than those who have the older weapons. And so on and so forth. And it's the same now, right? So like drone technology is one of the main things that's going to make an army successful in modern warfare. And
Space Force.
A Viking Space Force, by the way.
Oh, now we're talking.
Yeah, right.
Now we're talking.
So yeah, the thing is that the thing is, of course, that is also the case in the medieval period, right? And so if you have somebody who comes up with something new, and maybe the situation is that Vikings, or just pre-Vikings, they actually went to war with helmets with horns on them, or something like that. At least some of them. Maybe that is the situation, and then that worked out well in the beginning in England, and then they came back and got their asses kicked because the English had like upped their game on all of this stuff, and then they were like, let's take the horns off. I saw Thorstein over there get taken down in a really embarrassing way.
And all I can think is I can imagine you would just get a bunch of people, especially if it was guys, because guys are dumb. Just get like a bunch of dudes at a battlefield waiting for everyone turns up in whatever they've got, and then there's always that one guy who's going to come in something ridiculous, or think he has like a brand new idea, come up with this new weapon that's ridiculous. We all know somebody that's like that.
We do.
I just imagine there would just be somebody that would come in just something ridiculous, and I almost wonder if there's like a sense of peacocking as well, like one-upmanship in what you're gonna wear to the battle, whether it's ridiculous or not, because you wanna stand out, you want everyone to watch you, and even if it means you might have a chance of dying, there are still, I know some guys that would still want to look good, or what they consider to look good, over practicality.
Yeah, no, it's true. Um, and yeah, there's the people who want to look good. There's the people who want to look cool when they are fighting and all that stuff. And peacocking is definitely part of it. Like, just look at MMA and tattoos, or look at football and tattoos, right?
Well, hair. I think hairstyles
hair,
become a big one in MMA. Like, people who they'll just dye their hair a ridiculous color. Sugar
we
Sean,
remember this.
His hair is all different colors. Very
And
6ix9ine, the rapper esque.
And look who started it. It was fucking Beckham, right? Like, you go back to the early 2000s, right? And you see those iconic players back then, right? They're the ones who started that, that stuff. It wasn't prevalent that much in the 90s. It's become a thing, right? And that's because it, makes you stand out. It makes you more appealing. Can also make you more scary looking, or whatever, right? If people fall for it. So there's a lot of things to consider there.
You would want to look. I know I'd want to look scary if I was going to battle. If there was me and somebody else next to each other, I'd want the person opposite me to think I'm gonna go for that person there rather than the scary looking guy, because I don't want to die. So I'd rather go fight him, leave me looking scary and mean, and you just go over there. Mathias, I forgot to mention this at the beginning of the episode, unless you've got something to
I just wanted to add one thing, because Frederick in the chat is talking about whether or not there was a lot of grappling and that kind of stuff in those medieval warfare scenarios. And yes, there was. There was a lot of hand-to-hand kind of situations. There are some martial arts books, whatever you can call them, from Germany, from the 1400s and 1500s, that show a lot of like hand-to-hand, or two people fighting it out with knives and that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of by the way, a lot of good advice about hitting somebody in the nuts or cutting off their balls and stuff like that.
Of course. Like, I know people may think of it as being dirty, but if it's me or you and one of us is gonna die, I don't care what. I'll bite your dick if I'm gonna bite it. Whatever I'm gonna do, as long as I don't die, it's gonna happen. But yeah, I think I always wonder about grappling, because you always see it in TV shows and movies where there'll be two people, they'll lock eyes across the battlefield, and they'll come to blows, and they'll have like a 5-minute little battle back and forwards, a little bit of rolling around. And I'm just like, if I'm next to them, one of you is just getting my axe or sword or whatever in the back of your head. I'm not watching you have your little moment. One of you is fucking getting it.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's also ridiculous. And another thing, when we think about fighting like that in a battlefield like that, I think we should think of it more in terms of that scene in the Lord of the Rings where Deagle and Smeagol are fighting over the ring than anything else. Like, that's how this stuff is going to play out. Like, it's going to be ugly, dirty, and really unpleasant. It's not that glorious shit where you get a moment to take off your helmet and say, "I am no man," and then stick your sword in the face of the Nazgul and that kind of stuff.
No, I think the most realistic one I've seen would be the Battle of the Bastards in Game of Thrones. I think that was a terrifying war scene. I think that's as real as I've seen, that made me genuinely uncomfortable. Because I think no matter what we could ever picture a battle scene to be, I don't think we could ever get anywhere near to what it actually would be, because there'd be bits and pieces hanging off people everywhere. I don't think it would be nice. Xander, Sandra in the chat just said my new Viking nickname is Dan Dickbiter, which I do not want to stick. Let's not keep that one around.
Well, you should not have mentioned it on the podcast.
Well, you know me, but I mean, I don't want to keep that one around too long. I don't want to get a reputation. But yeah, no, what I wanted to mention was I started reading the book River Kings earlier and realized, why have you not mentioned to me about this really cool Danish guy buried in Repton that's about an hour from me?
I just did the other day.
Well, he got briefly mentioned, but we didn't mention where it was. I think Simon brought it up about the I did not realize that was the warrior who had his dick chopped off, not to go back. Chopped off. I mean, maybe it was bitten off. I don't know. Someone could have bitten that bit. I don't know.
Maybe he met your ancient ancestor.
Maybe he met my half Dan the dick biter might have come along and just chopped it off. I don't know. I cannot confirm or deny what happened, but I didn't realize that was the same person, and that literally an hour from me there's all this wealth of Viking history, I guess.
Yeah, it's right over there, man. Just go look at it.
I know. Why have we never spoken about that? And I want to do an episode on, because it sounds fascinating. Apparently is there a mass grave there as well?
Yeah. Like and this is also what the fuck is it called? Not so far from there, there's there's like a site with several burial mounds, which is one of the few Viking burial mound areas in England.
I actually messaged Simon. I know I said Simon earlier, but Simon earlier, because they mentioned that there's a burial or a grave with 4 children in it, which is near the mass grave, and maybe there's possibly a ritual sacrifice because the 4 children have been decarbonate people. Yes, I guess maybe whatever you do too, but they apparently come from different geographical locations. But they're all together in one grave, and they look like they've got wounding on the bones. So I messaged him to ask what he thought about it. So that's why I would really like to do an episode on the whole Repton thing. Yeah, now I've learned about it.
We should talk to a English archaeologist on that one. One of the people who have been involved.
I think the lady who wrote River Kings, and her name, it's Kat, but I keep wanting to go back to Kat Jennings because that just will not leave my mind, and I know it's not that. But if someone could please pull up, because I'm like a few chapters into the book, but I'm really, really enjoying it. And I think she worked on the site, did a lot of work with like one of the beads there, apparently, that linked back to India. So I would definitely like to reach out to her and see if we can get her on the podcast and talk about, because Kat Jarman, that's the one. Yeah, the book, like I said, the book seems really good. I say that I'm reading it, I'm actually listening to it, but it's all the same.
Hey, yeah, it is. I mean, why not listen to listen to books instead, like when you're driving or working with your hands anyway. Like,
I mean, if you're listening to anything, listen to podcasts first, primarily
of course,
this one.
But
then
podcast,
if you've got a bit of time after that, you just pop over.
Yeah.
No, it's really good, and I would like to. Hopefully, we can get her on and talk about Repton, because it does seem fascinating to have like a mass grave. I think it's a warrior, and they think it's maybe his son, or there's somebody else buried with him. I'm trying to get this out before I forget it all. And then obviously the 4 children, the whole thing seems quite interesting. So I think we should do an episode on that. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about was I think it was found last year. Was it the little rune stick? I think there was 2 that were found in Norway. One was carved on a bone, I think, like the jawbone of a horse, I think it was, or some animal like that. And then, but I think they said that did it have Latin and Norse runes on it?
I think so.
And I saw that pop up. Well, it was actually Sarah that sent me the article, which I found quite quite interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, so I just gotta say, like, this is one of the few instances where modern media inadvertently uses Norse correctly, because we're in Norway and Norse means Norwegian. So good on you guys for that, but of course it's still, applied problematically. But anyway, so what we got here is a couple of rune sticks that have been found during some ongoing excavations. And yeah, both Latin and Nordic, Norse. We're in the medieval period, so let's call it Norse. We can, and yeah, I mean, it's not uncommon in the medieval period to find Latin and vernacular on, like, carved on the same objects. So it looks like from the article that talks about this on the Smithsonian, that the dating of the runes have been dated loosely between 1100 and 1350. So it makes perfect sense. To those who are unaware, there are thousands of rune sticks of these kinds that have been found in Brücken in Norway, in what is now Bergen. Or it was also Bergen back then, by the way. Brücken is the harbor area of Bergen. And yeah, what we get is like this, like, really, really awesome look into everyday life, and well documented everyday life, like people just like carving runes on all kinds of material, slandering each other, talking about people, writing down curses, writing down grocery lists, and sending each other messages, and all that kind of stuff, indicating really that a very high, considerable number of the population in Bergen at the time were capable of using runes to communicate. So what I see from this one is that it's your typical standard Latin religious stuff that you get. The phrase that is carved on this one is Manus Domine, and that means into your hands, O Lord. That's part of a medieval prayer. So yeah, that's pretty common. What else?
Why would they write part Latin, part runes? Would they be done by the same person, or would it be one person does one person does the other, or is it common that people would have known both? Would that not mean you'd have to be quite highly educated to know both?
So this is the ongoing conversation. So the first things first, this idea that everybody was illiterate in the medieval period is a 19th century fantasy about how, or actually 18th century fantasy from like the Enlightenment period, where it was customary to shit on the medieval period. I mean, just think about it. The word medieval, like the Middle Ages, right? It's like this in European history writing is considered sort of like a fluke, a dormant time period when nothing happened, right? That's how the Renaissance scholars liked to portray the medieval period. The Renaissance, of course, means the rebirth, right? The rebirth of essentially the classical period before everything went to shit. So that's like historically the view that Europeans in modern times have had on the medieval period, that the medieval period was just like this time period where nothing happened and people were idiots and illiterate and had rotten teeth, and that's really it, right? That's not the case. The medieval period was a very affluent period. It was a period full of scholarship and integration with the rest of the world, and a fuck ton of things were happening. And the Renaissance could not have happened if they hadn't built up to it in the medieval period, right? So that view is in and of itself problematic. And with that view comes this idea that nobody had any knowledge of schooling or training or blah, 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 right? And so with that came also the idea that everybody was illiterate. That's really not the case. I mean, there are different levels to which on which how people interacted with the written language, right? Some people knew a few words, they could recognize that. Some people knew the alphabet. As it turns out, it looks like a lot of people in Scandinavia knew runes as a primary way of communicating with one another. Like it looked like that was kind of like just fucking standard, at least in urban centers like Bergen, right? That you could just carve runes, just like we text message each other today. Was that the same? So the question is, was that the same with like Latin letters? No, probably not. You probably had to be, a little more educated, right? But that does not preclude the notion that, some merchant who didn't have much education or anything like that, but, had interactions with quote unquote higher society in different ways, could probably pick up, a phrase or two, remember how to write that down. And that's probably how we're seeing some of these, bits and pieces of prayers, for instance, being carved on such sticks, right? Consider the scenario of like somebody who keeps practicing doing that. And if I remember correctly, what I see on that rune stick is also that then there's the object, Norse inscription, Basmartherpen, which seems to be a nickname. So what you have here is like Latin carved in runes and a name carved in runes, right? That's the situation that we
do we know why they seem to do that either? Because it seems like so many things are just people's names carved on it, and it just doesn't make sense to me. Like, why would you carve your name on a stick? I mean, because it's not like, unless, well, at least, I mean, maybe this is what we've got left, but it's not like a good stick. When you're walking through the woods and you see a good stick, you're like, I want that stick. I'm like a dog, but I'm like, that's a good stick. That's a good walking stick, or you can do something with that stick. These are just like maybe like 10-inch pieces of flat wood.
So looking at this one,
why would you claim that?
Looking at this one, it looks like it's broken off. So we don't know if there was like more to it, or that tends to be a big problem with wood that we find like that. It's we don't know the entire context and text and the physical material, how much was there. But yeah, so like think about it in this way though too, right? You sit around and wait for something to happen, and you have pen and paper next to you, or you're sitting in class and you're bored, those kinds of things. What do you start doing? Drawn? Dicks. I was just gonna say, Dan will be drawing dicks. Other people will be writing their name, right? Or drawing smiley faces or whatever, right? We do that all the time, and these people were no different than from us in that regard. Most people would have a knife on them, right? And then you have a piece of wood, and it's very easy to just quickly flatten the surface and then carve runes into it. Practicing your rune skills, man.
Yeah, and I guess I always have this idea that they would have something better to do, or at least something more important to do, like tending the field, farming the crops. But it gets dark really soon, so I imagine they would have a lot of nighttime.
I think I've pointed this out before, but if you look at all the different things that a person in the Nordic Bronze Age had to do to stay alive and like produce all the different things that they needed, you're looking at an average workday of 4 hours, right? In the medieval periods, like in the high Christian era, the Catholic Christian era, you have something like 160 days off, or something. Like it's an insane amount of days that are allocated to church stuff and days dedicated to saints where you're not working and you're not doing the regular field things and all that stuff. Adding to that, right, you go at a pace where industrial production and production methods and time management has not been introduced, right? So that means that you take your break when you need it, unless you're like, you have some kind of dude whipping you or whatever. And so ultimately you could find plenty of little breathing holes throughout the day where you could sit down and do something else. And of course with that also comes like time allotted to prayer and eating and taking a dump and all that stuff too, right? But the point is that our concepts of work schedules and time and all that stuff are so fundamentally different from the medieval period. Like, it's it's funny when people that you have this situation of people romanticize the medieval period, the Viking Age, whatever, and then other people like to throw in, but then you'd like die of like an infected wound, or you wouldn't have the medical blah blah blah. It's like, yeah, sure, but you also wouldn't be working yourself to death, stressing out like this, and basically living in a society, especially here in the US, that kind of expects you to be working 365 days a fucking year, unless you can pay to not do that. So, and like, work culture, modern industrialized work culture is one of the most toxic things in the whole world, honestly.
See, I just assumed that they would have been working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, just to get by and get the food for
there was a lot of work, but it's not in the same way as you think about it today. Like our way of thinking about work is like you start and then you don't finish until you're allowed to finish, pretty much, right? That's for factories, man. Like that's factory work, labor situations. But that's not how work would have functioned in the medieval period. There's a time for dealing with the field, right? Whether it's like sowing or harvesting or plowing or whatever, right? There's a time for that during the day. There's a time for, fixing woodwork that needs to be fixed, or rethatching the roof and so on and so on. Like the most caricatured example of this is, of course, the traditional Spanish siesta, right? Sleeping in the middle of the day. Why? Well, that's because that's the hottest period. So sleeping and eating at that time is smarter than, being in the fields and working, right? That's an old custom that was practiced in a lot of places in those areas where it's hotter during the day and the midday, right? So that's an example of how people would basically plan their day and their schedule based off of, a more relating to a natural setting, right? Living quote unquote natural. And that's stuff that we've completely forgotten. With the introduction of the textile mills in the 1740s in England, that's when all that stuff went out the window and we got fucked. So that's the depressing news about the modern times,
I mean, yeah, fair enough. Like I say, I always just had this assumption that they'd work non-stop because it was tough and life was tough and you had to work really hard, and if you didn't work hard, then you didn't eat and you starved to death and died.
Well, I mean, there was a lot of that too, of course, but this depends on where we are, when we are, and so on, right? It's like, so go to Venice in the 1400s and you will see things that are very similar to modern industrial productions. You can go to places in France in the 1500s and see the same thing, 1600s for that matter, in England in the 1700s and so on, with different kinds of trades. Usually it's like in the late medieval period and early modern period, the development of these economies and industries, right, is very specific to certain locations and certain things that they're producing, right? It's not like an encompassing situation like we have it today, where there's no place on the planet where you can escape industrialized production, right? Back then, there was certain places that had industrialized productions, and a lot of other places that didn't.
Okay.
And then slowly things get introduced from there, right?
Okay. So,
and that's why I brought up the textile mills from England, because the textile mills in the 1700s in England, that's where what you could call like modern industrialized mass production begins. Also with the mines as well.
My whole area is built on textile, like Huddersfield, Halifax, Bradford. They were like the textile centers of the world. Okay, last question before we wrap up. Would you swap your life now and the amount you work now with them to work less, but you have to be back then and live the way they lived?
No.
I didn't think you would.
No.
And that's the thing, we say, oh, we're fucked, it all got fucked, we have to work so hard, and then it's like, but do I want to go back and live in a cold
thing is
with all my family in one?
The thing is that if I had the same course of life in the medieval period as the one that I have had, right, I would probably be dead by 17. Like that's a pretty likely scenario, because when I was 17, I had a pretty bad staph infection, and that only went away with like some serious antibiotics, right, which did not exist prior to the late 19th century, early 20th century, right? Penicillin, I think, was invented in that time period. And so like I would most certainly be crippled at 17, if not dead.
Just to correct you, penicillin was discovered, not invented, but who am I to
right. Fine, yes, it's a fungus, so yeah, that's true. Anyway, the point
is it Alexander Fleming? He went on holiday and left some petri dishes out, and came back and accidentally discovered Fleming. That's what I remember from my high school. I think it was Fleming. Someone please tell me it was Fleming, and I haven't embarrassed myself.
But it was a British guy, so you guys would learn about that, right?
For some reason, I had a really good history teacher at GCSE, and we did the history of medicine. And I just remember people like Edward Jenner and Louis Pasteur and the man who did stitches, Paré, and Galen, the Roman who cut open pigs to find out.
Right. I vaguely remember that stuff too.
And Hippocrates, all this stuff. I just, for some reason, remember it because I had one good teacher for a couple of years, and it just all kind of absorbed in there somehow.
Yeah, but I mean, so like, if you think about that, right? And I think a lot of people, modern people, have a story like that. It's like, oh, I got this particular infection, or I needed surgery for something when I was like in my teens, or something like that, right? And so most of those people who have those stories today, right, they would have been dead back then, right? Like existence for human beings in the medieval period was like a hit or miss kind of thing, right? Like just think about it. Like we're dealing with like 50% child death in general, like within the first 5 years. Most in labor. And of course, like it is, kind of anachronistic to like say, oh well, if I had the same course of life, like that, there could be other factors. Maybe I wouldn't be so easily maybe Staphylococco wouldn't be so easily introduced into my life situation in the medieval period. Who the fuck knows? Like, but maybe E. coli on the other hand would be everywhere because you shit what you eat in the medieval period, right? Like, or there's like a bunch of other things to take into consideration. Then there's warfare, right? Then there's a tavern brawl. Then there's
Dan the dick biter is not getting past 20.
No, right.
I'm going out either with infection or by sword. Sword might be the wrong word to use, or axe.
Yeah, and that's and family feuds. There are plenty of things in the medieval period or in the Viking Age, for that matter, that can kill you. And as I said, just the fucking cold, right? If I were born in the same social class in the medieval period, I'm not like we would probably be living in the hovel with like holes in the thatched roof, and as like tenant peasants who had to work almost as slave labor for the lord, that kind of stuff. Like, the likelihood of me surviving that scenario past just 7 would be kind of ridiculous, right? So overall, no, life is better now.
You see so many people online who were like, I'd go back then. I wish I could swap my life to be back then, or really glorify being alive back then. And I'm like, no, like there's a lot of things wrong with the world right now, but it is undoubtedly the best time to be alive ever in human history, unless maybe when the aliens were here, like tens of thousands of years ago. But it's undoubtedly the best time to be alive. And yeah,
I think so. Like, in terms of like material existence, in many ways, this is definitely the best time to exist. We don't have to worry too much about whether or not our newborn gets too cold and dies from an infection within the first 3 months, right? Like, because most of us live, at least in the Western world or the industrialized world, which isn't necessarily particularly Western. We live in decent housing, right? We have access to a lot of nutrients as well, easy access to nutrients. Again, a factor that keeps people alive through their early years. A lot of children would die from starvation or malnutrition back then, right? And exposure in different ways. That's the first thing that we need to consider. So if you live past 7, 8, 9, 10, 15, right, then there's infections, psychotic neighbors, warfare, the weather, getting kicked in the face by a horse, like a bunch of things that could then take you out, right? Nowadays, what we have to worry about is like, car accidents and the occasional food poisoning or some random pandemic that happens, right? But even with a random pandemic, we have a bunch of hospitals that can take care of people, right? That was not the case back then.
Better position. We were talking about this yesterday, actually, with no matter how you look at how the UK government has handled the whole thing, the rollout of the furlough system that they put in place to cover 80% of people's wages, with like straight away, as soon as they went into lockdown, like that was pretty much instantly. Certainly for like self-employed people got a grant, and maybe there's arguments whether that was enough or not, but employed people pretty much straight away, they were getting 80% of their wage at home. They didn't have to worry. And that has to be a credit, because a lot of back then that didn't exist. If the plague came about, you were on your own, fucking go survive. So you didn't have the infrastructure in place to kind of help out with things.
And the Lord, right, sitting over there in his castle, whom you work for because you're you like, that's another thing when people talk about this time period and wanting to go back to it, and like they always think of themselves to some kind of princess or cool badass warriors. Like, no, motherfucker, 95% of the population would be, a dirt poor peasants working for some lord, right? So that's your most likely existence, right? So the situation would then be that if, for instance, like the plague happened, right, something like that occurred, then your lord would be like, yeah, I'm just going to close the gate to my castle while you guys are dying out there. See you, those of you who make it. And once you do, I'm going to have you work the fields again, right? So that's how official society would be handling it back then, right? Like, so a situation where a government is giving furloughs and subsidies and all those kinds of things, and also access to hospitals and all that stuff. It's a lot better than the so-called good old days.
It's good. It's good time to be alive. All right, let's wrap this up. I know you've got to go and get a consultant about a hernia. So yeah, we're going to keep this one short, especially with my computer playing up earlier and not being able to get on. We'll just have to
it's
a bit of a shorter episode.
But that's another thing. Like such things as hernias back then, they would be handled with here. Let me try to tie this piece of cloth around your waist really tight.
This is how you live now,
so that your bowels won't fall out.
Yeah, you live with a piece of cloth around you now. That's the answer. There was no fixing it. I feel like I also should point out that I make a lot of jokes about aliens. I don't actually believe that aliens ruled the earth like 10,000 years ago. I just want to clarify that. Maybe they did. Maybe we don't know about it. But I feel like I've made too many alien references at this point. There's someone somewhere thinks that I'm an ancient alien. No, I'm not.
Of all the ridiculous conspiracy theories out there, I like that one the most. It's like least weaponized and bizarre.
All right, let's wrap this up. It's been fun. I would say we're back tomorrow, but we're back in a week for people listening, but we're recording tomorrow, which is going to be a fun episode. And everyone tune into that one, because it will be.
Yeah, no, that's going to be in
it's going to be a fun episode.
So if that's going to get us canceled, man.
Maybe this might actually be the last show you listen to, so enjoy it. We've enjoyed the run, and if you enjoy the show, please leave a rating or if you enjoy the show, please leave a 5-star rating and a positive review. Helps us bump up the charts, helps people find it. Helps us keep growing. Like I say, Patreon is a brilliant way to support us if you can. We know everybody can't, so if you can, we appreciate just the shares on Facebook, the shares on Instagram, telling people about it. Again, it brings other people into this who maybe haven't heard of the podcast and want to listen. Helps it keep growing. But if you can support us on Patreon, literally Nordic Mythology Podcast, type that into Patreon, you're going to find us. You get a bonus show every week. One episode is a Q&A where you can ask Mathias anything you want, and he's going to answer it in detail. He gets a lot of questions on Instagram asking topics that maybe we've covered, maybe we haven't hit something full in depth or answered the one question you have. So you can ask him that on the Patreon. You don't even have to join in live. You can submit the question. We'll record the episode and then we'll put it onto Patreon for you to listen after. But it gets you an in-depth question to it. And they've been a lot of fun with it so far.
It does, yeah. I think those episodes are going really well. They're also a little more less informal, less formal. And we chill out and we have good conversations and get to engage with the live audience more too, like which is also kind of fun.
And there is actually more than just Frederick in the chat.
There are more than just Frederick.
There are. It's just for some reason Frederick always seems to just get mentioned. And the other bonus episode is story
That's
time.
because he says relevant things, man.
There you go. Everyone else has to pick the game up. No, the other bonus episode is story time with Jonas and Renson, where we go through a saga and we'll read it beginning to end. Jonas comes on as the narrator. There's a bunch of voices. We get to sit back and then discuss it. It's a lot of fun. They're probably my favorite episode of the week. They just get nuts sometimes. And again, you can listen to them on the back catalog. You don't have to just be there live for them. They're all up on Patreon. So honestly, you could subscribe to the Patreon, listen to, I think there's 8 of them that we've got now there. You listen to the full Saga of the Volsunga series, listen to it, and then cancel your Patreon if you want. Listen to them and then go if it's not for you, or hang around and listen to the new ones. But yeah, they're definitely worth listening to. And you can find us Not Mythology Podcast across the board. Mathias, Instagram, as always.
Yes, you can find me on Instagram. That's it. But you should also, of course, if you are on Facebook, unlike me, you should definitely follow the podcast on there and sign up for the group, which I hear is a fun shit show. So there's that.
No, our Facebook group's brilliant.
There you go.
It's self-police. We don't have anyone too bad in there yet.
Oh, that's nice.
There's a few people might sneak by, but we get them pretty quick. Or they get all they get what's coming to them.
Yeah, that's true. They do get the smackdown in there.
There are some intellectuals in there who tell people some home truths. And I'm not one of them. There's a bunch of places you can follow us, but we appreciate that you're listening to the main episode, because that's kind of got us to where we are, and we love doing it and want to keep growing it and getting more and more. So yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that is it.
Thank you for listening.